The digital art era is here. AI and art creation tools empower anyone to make it. Blockchain technologies allow anyone to own it. VR, AR, and extended reality immerse us in it. Let's talk to artists and innovators behind the visual magic. I'm your host, Roger Dickerman. Welcome to the future of art. Today, we welcome Roope Rainisto. Roope is a designer, a creator, a photographer, a screenwriter, and an endless learner, bringing his diversity of life experience to the frontier of artificial intelligence. He is challenging the way we see the world and the way we feel it through collections like Life in West America with BrainDrops and REWORLD with Fellowship. In this conversation, Roope begins with one of the most thought-provoking responses to the question, what is art, that I can remember? And we never look back. I hope you enjoy it too. Let's get to it. Roope Rainisto, welcome to the future of art.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
I believe I told you this off air. I want to reiterate it now here. I've gained a lot of awareness and respect. I mean, I think those two things go hand in hand as I've been exposed to your work more and more, just covering it, reporting on it, seeing it day in, day out, week in, week out. It's really, really grown on me. I'm actually quite excited to talk about several of your collections.
Yeah, I mean, great. I mean, it's fantastic to really, it's part of this Web3 world, really, to kind of like start to form new relationships. So I think even though there's plenty of things one might want then to complain about this overall thing of how the world works, I think it's still a fantastic way to really then to start to know new interesting people and so on. So
I agree with that philosophy very, very much. Well, before we dig into all of that, before we get to your artwork and the community as a whole, let me ask you this question. Roope, what does art mean to you?
Art, I mean, that's a fantastic question, and I think that's at the core of a lot of things. There's a large amount of interesting conversations, like then every week people talk about, is this art? Is this not art? Is this the good art? Are you an artist? What the hell are we about to do here? And I think it's then all the same thing. I have a personal, or I have my thought as to how you define art, and of course this is not my thought as such, but I think this is a thought that I then subscribe to. So I think for me, art is fundamentally about our feelings. So art is fundamentally about that there's a person who we now call the artist, and they want to transmit our feelings then to somebody else. I think one way to think about it is of course with the kind of the Web3 world. But if we take like a kind of different comparison, so if we switch to thinking about like the music, so what is the point of a love song or songs, or let's say a kind of the love song? So so why do people write the love songs, or what is it that they then try to do? And I think the answer is then kind of clear. So in a way, the song tries to make you feel the thing that the person who wrote the song, then had on their mind. Or if it's a film, is it a sad film or a kind of the happy film? The film tries to make you feel then something. And I think that's then fundamentally, in my mind, that's how I see art. So art is not if you think about us the school, then a textbook. If there's a school textbook page about the love, that text is not art. Hopefully, probably. It does not then try to make you feel those feelings, but a kind of the love song. That's the whole point of the song then tries to not only communicate facts, but it's the kind of the attempt then to make you then to feel something.
I like how you articulated that. So by your definition of art, what attracted you to it in the first place? Where did you see yourself in that equation?
Well, artists are so on a personal level. So I've been then creating since I've been a teenager. So I'm now then 44. So like almost in 30 years. So I've been writing poems when I was a teenager, or I played in bands. I've written songs. I've taken photos for 30 years. I've done some bad short films. So I've personally done that a lot. So I think it's a very I don't know what is the kind of the attraction. I think of course that's probably many people then try to compensate for something. So or they try to build something that I mean there's some probably internal psychological reasons that I'm not sure if I've even completely then internalized myself, but I think I think the attraction is that it's not the logical. So I've been a kind of the logical person for a long time. So I've then graduated as an engineer, and I've done computer sciences and so on. So I've been working quite much on the kind of the logical side of things, or the logical side of my brain, and that's probably also why. So then roughly then 2.5 years ago, I had the midlife crisis, as people that then turn 40 have. So I had 25 years as a professional designer, a quite a successful designer, working on smartphones and then virtual reality headsets and so on. And then I thought, well, I don't want to grow old and I feel then a regret that I then didn't try then to kind of do the things that I've been always had on the background since I've been a teenager. So I then went then freelancer. I then quit my job, and I then started then to explore this side of then art. I'm still somewhat then hesitant to call myself an artist. I think many people that call themselves that place quite much then importance on the kind of the word and the title, and I'm not a huge fan of that side, but I do think that I do then create art.
So one, I think you just flagged for me I may be approaching a midlife crisis because I'm approaching 40, not too far behind you. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But on the serious side of that, so I find that fascinating. So it's essentially 2.5 years ago to have that thought process, to take that step, not necessarily defining yourself as an artist, but to say, I want to experience this. I want to try something different. When you do go down that road, what are those first steps that you take when you've made, I mean, let me actually ask this a different way. Was that a light switch moment for you when you went through that quote unquote midlife crisis? Was it like a light switch going off where you said, I have to do this now, and I know how I'm going to walk down this road? Or was it more of a gradual shift?
I do think it was kind of the light switch, or the switch that turns in your head at the one moment. It takes a long time to switch, but I do think of the issue of regret of that there's many things in my life that I then regret that I haven't done, as the most people probably have some types of then regrets, and I then as we then grow older, we hopefully are smarter in a way that we understand that it's not an infinite, this is not an infinite life. Next week I can be dead, so it then probably makes sense then to try to do the things that you want. And I think that's part of this overall thing of like, it comes from my then feeling. So I mean this starts from my feeling, so it's not a kind of then result of some long discussion in my, or this long then thinking process where I think the pros and cons, but it really came from an overwhelming sense of that it feels like something that I want to do. So that's it's hard, and I think that's the one side of it. If you go back to this question of art and feelings, that it's kind of like, many people say that it's hard to talk about your feelings, and I think that's then interesting, because I think it then kind of relates. I think art is a way to communicate feelings, because it's actually quite hard to talk about your feelings, or it's hard then to put things in words. So I mean, if you then love somebody or feel sadness or so on, it's hard to communicate that with just the word. It feels then clumsy and so on. So people have then invented all types of then art forms, be them music, or be them the writing or painting or pictures and so on. And they're all then kind of the different ways to communicate feelings, or then to make somebody then feel something. And I think it's a much the richer form if you think about only the communication people do with then words or texts. It's so then constrained. So there's many cases where an art piece makes you feel something, but you can't, explain why. And I think that's then hugely exciting. So it's not a kind of the logical thing, and I think that's why the rules are then so different.
How do you begin? You make this decision, you decide to go down this road. How do you begin? What's literally, can you remember the first art piece that you worked on?
Well, I mean, then we come into this interesting kind of like, then coincidence that this happened in 2021. So, I then quit in 2021. If I would have then quit in 2016, I would have probably then started to go full time in the photos. I mean, I'd be doing then photography or then 3D. I'd be doing some 3D art and so on. So, but it just so happens in 2021, and I thought, well, I see this new thing, this weird new things of like the first glimpses of AI that is like then installable then by me. So of course, I mean, AI has then existed for a long time, but in 2021, then finally then became like then approachable. So I mean, that's a kind of pure then coincidence. When I first saw it, I thought, well, I know how to use a camera. So I've been taking hundreds of thousands of photos. So I was thinking, okay, now I have this a virtual camera. So that's the main then approach. So I can start then to point this then towards something. You probably can still see this approach in my art. So I do approach this in a way that it's kind of like then photographic, or at least in some way, then quite often. So that's probably the reason of I've been doing the photography for a long time. But I think, of course, so then that was the start. But I think that was not yet the success. I think the success actually came. I mean, success for me as a Web3 artist actually came when I then decided to do something completely different. So I mean, I then approached it for a long time as in a way that these tools are replacing my camera. So I mean, I don't have to pick up a camera anymore. I don't do the same things with this that I don't do with my camera. And I think that's what the many people then think. But actually, the kind of the light switch, which they really went on in my head, is that that's actually a bad idea. I think the good idea is to do something that I can't do with my camera, and I think that was really the kind of the key for me. So don't do something that I can do with a camera, but I mean rather try to explore what is the new language. So I mean, what is it that I can't do with my camera? So and I think once then that then switch then went then off in my head, then I started to do something interesting. So then I started to explore this. Don't try to hide the AI nature of art, but rather try to expand or then to explore and see is there a new then language? Is there something I can create or express with art or some the new forms that people perhaps they haven't seen before. Is there some new ways to make people then feel something? And I think that's the thing that I've been now then doing on for the past the 15 months or so.
What are a few examples of things that you've discovered that you can't do with a camera?
Yeah, I mean, camera is tied to reality in many ways. So of course, I mean that's kind of like it's tied to one specific moment in time, one perspective, one scale, one reality, kind of like. So now, if you think of some art form like then, for instance, then cubism, which has of course many aspects, but one part of that art form is actually that or then that style is that actually you can have paintings that tell the story from like the multiple viewpoints at the same time, or like multiple perspective, multiple scales. And I think that's how these paintings are they usually then interpreted. And I think that same approach, I mean, now that I create art or I call them post photography, those same then principles or these same things actually then apply. So I can create art that is not tied to the fact that the viewpoint or the perspective is consistent, or it's like the one moment or time, or kind of like actually the way I interpret these pieces in my head. So if there's one person that has like then four hands, it's actually the hands are in like then not in the same the moment in time, but it's like a way then to show that it has then moved, or kind of like it's actually a way then to express these types of things. And I think this kind of rule set or this new way of them visually communicating is quite exciting.
That's that's interesting, like a time lapse. Very interesting.
Time lapse or like kind of like the same that thing that it's the more loose. So I mean, you play with these photographic conventions. So I mean, people have, especially in our cultures, people see so much photographs that we have this kind of rules in my mind of how to read photos, how to interpret this, and I think it's really fun then to play with those rules. So I mean, so you can then create artworks that on first glance you get one interpretation, then you spend more time with them and you actually start then to see something completely different. Or you actually kind of like start to question, I think it's the really fun to, or it's the really exciting to play with this concept of kind of like reality. I mean, photos are not real. I mean, even then we want to pretend that photos are real, but of course, I mean, photos haven't been real, or photos are not real. They're then 2D pictures that pretend to be real. And I think this is kind of like really then to be more than explicit with that. That's kind of like extremely interesting to me.
How do you think through your creative process? For example, when you, let's say, engage the computer, have an idea to create, maybe have some feelings that you wish to convey, experiment, and then let's say you get to a point in time when you have now created the official artwork that is going to come out of that thought process, versus when you decide to take that, maybe that very same artwork and mint it, meaning theoretically place it in a collector's hands and develop a relationship on the other side of that, passing some ownership to somebody else. How do you think through that piece of the equation, from creation to potentially collecting?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like it's a very good question overall. I think it also relates to this question that when do I know if a piece is done, or when do I know that it's kind of like good art? And I think this is actually a nice segue back to, if we go back to the start of the conversation. So if we define art as being then attempts for the kind of the artist then to transmit feelings, I really like that definition, because inbuilt it has this way of actually you can quantify, or then you can start to check, or it's actually inbuilt this a rubrics of kind of like, is this then bad art or then good art? Because it's inbuilt that, if you write a love song and somebody feels that feeling, then it's good art. If you write a love song and then it then doesn't make you feel that, then it's not good. Or, or if I see a piece of art and I don't feel a thing, versus I see then something else, then I do feel something. You can say that the piece that then makes me then feel something is then good. And I'm a fan of this then because of that it's not just saying that it's art, but it actually has this kind of way to say, is something then good or bad. I think there's a lot of a really pointless discussion where people argue over, is this art or not? So they find something online and they say, I don't think it's art, or somebody else says that it's art. I think it's much easier to say, well, it can be then art, but it can be also, there is such a thing called the bad art. So, I mean, rather than arguing, is this art or not, you can say, well, it's art, but it's bad, or, it fails. It's a picture of a cat. And it's a nice, it's a nice picture of a cat, but I don't feel a thing. I can say, well, yeah, it's art. In a way, it's the bad art because, it's not functioning in a way, where a kind of good art piece then makes me feel something. And I think that, well, this is a kind of side step, but it's an answer to the question of like, when do I know how to mean something, or, when do I know then how to release something? I use this then final test, that, I create something and then if it then doesn't make me feel something, I can't, release it or mint it. I've created lots of art that they look fantastic and kind of like is in a way should be there, but if I'm really them fair to myself, I don't feel a thing. And then I know that, if I don't feel it, then how can I expect then somebody else then to feel something? Of course, it's not. I can't be sure that, even if I feel something that, somebody else will feel it. But I'm sure that if then even I don't feel something, how can I expect somebody else then to feel something? So this is in a way this kind of like, it's a really good point, because then you can have artworks that are really bad in a kind of the technical sense. I mean, they can be like, bad resolution or then broken, but they can still make me feel something. And then I know it's the good art, or then vice versa. I can create art that looks complicated, and I spend a lot of time there, and it's like the super detailed and beautiful, but it's then it's not then working. Then it's like craft, or then it's a picture. And I think this is a kind of like, this is the answer I try to apply to myself. I was actually watching this interview by then Rick Rubin. So he's the music producer, probably a famous guy. And he was actually talking about this exact same thing. So he was saying, do not think about the audience. Hopefully I now kind of then get this quote right, but he was saying, don't think about the audience. Don't try to make something that you think that the audience will like. Just, you can't know what they feel. The audience is vast, and everyone has their own feelings. If you try to create songs, he was now then talking about songs. Try to create songs that you think that the audience might feel something too. You can't know it. The only feelings that you can't, then go into are your own. You can be 100% sure that that if you feel, those are the only feelings that you really then go into. So you must listen to those, because that's the real information. All the rest is kind of like, you pretend, or you then assume that I think know how then somebody else feels something. And I think this is actually it's true, and I think that's the reason why you must go with your own feelings and don't create something that you think, well, I'm not a fan, but I guess somebody else might then enjoy this.
I like that lens quite a lot. It also is a more controllable lens for somebody, right? For a creator.
Yeah, it's easier because now if you think about the kind of the audience member, you think, well, there's that now there's 1,000 different people, so I think these 200 might like them, or I mean, who the hell knows? I mean, but if it's just you, then it's like I have my own then things that I like, but it's easier now that I have this internal check. It's done. I mean, if I then like it, of course that's now of course now the part of this kind of then equation of this kind of Web3 world. And I think of course smart artists then of course puts art out also as the teasers or just kind of samples, and then starts to see the kind of the reception. So of course quite much things that I liked nobody else they liked. So I think it's important to have that kind of sensibility of finding something that you find interesting, and you have data or you have understanding that there's people outside who then seems then to think of the same.
You touched on something just a bit ago that made me think of two polar ends of a conversation that I hear quite often. And one was, first of all, I like that your definition of art is inclusive, but while also being willing to make while willing to have qualitative discourse within that inclusive definition. In other words, saying, hey, that picture of a cat may be bad art, right? And something else, maybe it meets a different standard. I want to talk about these two poles. So what I'm referring to, one side of the discussion is this piece of art is technically perfect, but does not make me feel anything. And then the other side of the spectrum would be this piece of art is in shambles. It is a technical mess, but it is brilliant in its conveying of feelings. And quite often we see artists and collectors, for that matter, having discourse on these polar opposites. And some people have some very strong opinions. How do you feel about those poles?
Yeah, it also depends on art form. So if you think about something like then kind of then gen art. So I mean, gen art is usually it's very then aesthetic. It's the very technically complex and fantastic and beautiful. And gen art really makes me feel something. So I think that's why part of the reason it would be hard for me to create them. But I do think, of course, my interpretation of feeling is not the only one. I mean, or you can say that one basic feeling is of course the feeling of like then beauty, and I think of course then gen art can be like extremely beautiful, and then when you see them beautiful things, you then feel things. So I think that's the fine. Of course, I do think that kind of like the whole thing of like emotion, how you create emotions, is that it's not logical, or that there's no firm then formula, so there's no rule book or then algorithm. If there would be, then you would then start then to implement that, and then to make sure that all art actually then makes you feel something. I think actually probably that's the kind of the worst thing you can do, and that's why it's hard for the kind of the AIs then to make art, because nobody knows the rules. If there would be somebody that would write the book as to this is the way you then ensure that your art is kind of like meaningful, then of course you then start to implement that. I don't think nobody yet kind of knows the rules. But I do think that I mean, art is such a huge thing, of course, that my views as an artist are of course my views, and they're subjective, and I think there's many kind of then collectors that have the different arguments, and that's fine, and I think that's the whole point. Nobody has the kind of the absolute truth on what art is or then isn't, but I do think it's hard then to I hope that everyone has their own rules, or something in their minds where they can say that is this then good art, or kind of like. Of course, for many probably is that once again it's not the verbal, but it's something they feel, which comes back to the kind of the feeling. So it's not a kind of the logical sheet that you can say, well, this is this is the good art because of then this and that and that. But it's kind of like something that you can't actually explain completely. And I think probably actually that is probably the best answer, that art actually has something that you can't explain completely. So if it is completely explainable, then it's probably rarely then good art. So I think many art is open or mysterious or kind of like then can be interpreted then in multiple ways, and I do think that that's the nature that it's hard to define. It probably actually has some then relationship to why it's good.
What is the first artwork then that meets every one of your criteria and that you then mint to have collected?
So I'm sorry, do you mean my personal or something that I've then collected from somebody else?
Well, we could go both ways, but first that you created.
That's a good question. I might freeze here because I can't probably say out aloud, what the exact piece of art would be there, but I do think it's also this related question, of course, that in many cases we know artists, the answer is not the one that is probably the highest valued, or kind of like that has the highest in financial value. I think quite often artworks that are personally meaningful to me might not be the most kind of like popular or most kind of like highly rated, and vice versa. And I think that's once again going back to this kind of thing about the music. So I mean, many songwriters, I don't claim to be a songwriter, but I mean songwriters claim that they can't predict if the song that they write is a hit, or the kind of the simple songs or the kind of the wrong songs are the hits. They pour their heart out in the songs that are not hits, and then they write these simple songs, and they actually become then popular. So I do think that the audience, or actually the audience decides, is it then good art, because the audience actually determines are they feeling something or not. So I mean, it's not, is art good or bad, it's not defined before the audience then reacts to it. So so actually the artist then doesn't have to say as to is something then good or not, but actually they kind of the audiences. But this is, I'm just then trying to not to answer the question, because I can't actually think of the exact art piece here. So
well, instead, how about an early-ish, right? Not necessarily the exact art piece, but an early-ish, something that is memorable to you in your early exploration of that relationship between what you were creating and then actually collectors on the other side.
Well, okay, well, probably one piece then I can point to art. So it's a piece that I won Claire Silver's and second AI art contest. So Claire, of course, does a fantastic kind of presence for the whole art community. So Claire, with her the many things. So she's then done these AI art contests, and of course I took part in her contest number 2. And I think so I created this kind of the video piece. So I quite actually a kind of the complex video piece. So it's the reimagined dancing, and I then did the music myself. I have the synth here on the side, and so I'm then quite proud of the piece, because I did then everything. I used a custom then Dreamboat train the model, I did the videos, I wrote the music, I did all that, and then of course then it just then happened then to win the competition. So I think that's a kind of the meaningful piece to me, because of course me being able then to win the competition probably brought quite much then attention. So it was probably a reason why I then got the chance to work, then to create something for them BrainDrops. So I mean that then happened a few months before I then started then to talk with the BrainDrops and gentlemen. Then so of course that's kind of like probably quite meaningful. I think it's a good piece of art, but it's also meaningful for me in a way that it was really the steps that led to then the great things.
Let's go into the BrainDrops collection, because I think that is when at least a number of different people that I interact with in the space, I think I was very loosely or very peripherally aware of you through the Claire Silver competition. But again, myself and many, many others, you really exploded onto the collective scene, right, as it were, with the BrainDrops release, Life in West America. How was it putting together an entire collection? What was that experience?
Well, it was pretty then crazy because I mean I was doing something that I then didn't see uh I didn't see somebody else working on it, and I think of course that's if you do that, either you're smart or then you're completely crazy. So I mean, if you find yourself to be the only person who's then kind of has a certain then approach, it's quite easy to start then to question yourself, where you're kind of like, what the hell are you then about to spend your the next 3 months full time working on it. So that was quite scary, but of course I did have a very strong feeling. Once again, going back to feelings, I created pieces that really they made me feel something. So I was kind of like, well, let's then take a risk. So I mean, when I see this, I certainly then feel a lot, and I felt them to be extremely exciting and then interesting and so on. So I think that was the thing that really helped me then to go through. But then to create 500 is actually 500. If you hear it for the first time, you kind of think, well, okay, well, how hard can it be? I mean, it's an AI. So I mean, how much time then does it actually take? But it actually 500 is actually a extremely exhausting number to do. If you do it in a way that you create 500 pieces that actually made you feel something, that all tell a kind of the different thing. So it's not the same thing. And I think there's of course many ways then to cheat. So if you think about most kind of art collections of 500 pieces, you can say that, well, perhaps they're not completely kind of like distinct. So I mean, there's some kind of like the replication, but I really tried my best to actually kind of like actually so much that I could do that they would actually be quite distinct. So then when you are then working on it for 2 months and you reach piece number then 423, and you start to remember, did I create a piece like then 2 months ago that is kind of the same? It's actually surprisingly hard just to even then to try then to remember 500 pieces. What do they look like, and what is it that I've then already done, and what more then could I tell, and is this then related or not? Because there's so much freedom, or there's so much things you can do, it's not always helpful. So I mean, if I would do normal photography, I would go out on the street, or I would go on a road trip. I would go from the coast to coast. I would take 5,000 pictures, then come back, and then I say, well, okay, now I need to pick from these 5,000. That's a much easier task. But then when you realize that you can create as much as you want, you can change every picture as much as you want, you can create something else. So this overwhelming choice is actually quite stressful as an artist, even though it's at the same time it's the most fantastic thing. So but yeah, I mean, I spend full time. I mean, I'm then fortunate enough to be able then to work on this full time. So I spent November, December, January, every single day. I woke up, I created art. I did that all the way to the evening. to the middle of the night. I remember doing it in a Christmas Day evening, and kind of like this. Then when you spend time on something for a long time, and you're not sure, will it succeed, or will this be like an insane failure? It's a quite an interesting test.
Indeed. So when you are going through that entire process and all of those thoughts, when you're working on such a large collection, because again, 500 is very significant, like you said, and you're working through the months, November, December, on Christmas Day, are you setting yourself constraints, like power and constraints to say, hey, I actually, at the end of the day, it is 500 pieces. I do have a time frame in general. And so are you setting yourself sort of one by one per piece, a number of iterations that you can work through, or thinking about it in some way, shape, or form like that, versus maybe a one of one that you might create and give yourself a little bit more leniency to iterate and maybe spend a bit more time?
Yeah, I mean, you must be, of course, then pragmatic in a way that you say, okay, if I complete 10 pieces a day, then it's 50 days, or I mean, that's then already like then 2 months, or and then well, actually, I created much more, but of course, you must start then to pace yourself, and you actually do need to create artistic processes where you can actually create and that quantity. So I mean, I'm quite proud of the quality and the quantity of doing it. It then did help me that I have then internally at home. I here have now then 3 computers. So I had then 3 computers to run it 24/7. So I had some some help there. But yeah, it is certainly kind of like it's not a technical problem, but you actually start to feel exhausted in terms of kind of like what is it that you can't tell anymore. So kind of like what is this after you reach 462? So I mean, what's the next story of kind of like how can I find something new? And I think that that's kind of like usually that's actually a good thing, because the your first instance are usually quite tame or lame, or kind of like the easiest ones. So you kind of like think of there's some pieces for instance, in the life in West America that are quite then probably then unusual, surprising, hopefully, and I think you couldn't start to kind of then to think of me midnight. Then I then go completely crazy, and I think, well, let's then put then this one in. And there's some pieces there, but I do think they actually work, because they're actually quite, hopefully, when you go and see the collection, you're not then bored. And I think all art probably part of something being interesting, that it's not then kind of dull, or like that you can predict what you will see next. And I think that's kind of like, it's hard when you go into those numbers.
You know what that brings to my mind? We tend to, I mean, a lot of collectors especially look at the space in terms of, putting some sense of rhyme or reason, right? You talked earlier about feelings versus logic, and I think naturally people in some way, shape, or form are pursuing their own logic, looking to put things in categories and boxes and make sense of all the craziness out there, right? Same thing with a collection. You go into an artist collection, oftentimes there are traits, right? Especially like a generative collection, especially known to have a lot of different traits and categorizations, and allow people to put things into boxes associated with aesthetics and rarity and all sorts of things. That just made me think of a trait that is not listed, but I thought of it as the Rope at midnight trait, right?
I did actually. I had interesting problems with these traits that, of course, I mean, I was then approached as, hey, what are your traits, and how you specify the rarity? And then kind of like, I have this feeling that how can they are all rare. So I mean, what does it mean? So I mean, how does something is how does an artist specify that some piece is more because rarity means that is more than precious. That's usually how this works. These rare pieces have more value. I somehow have this fixation that it's not for the kind of the artist to define which pieces are then valuable. It's for the collectors to define. At worst, I would specify rarity on something that people don't feel the same way, and think that's then just an insane. I think, of course, that's then quite specific to art. It's like a band would then put out a CD full of songs, and then before each song they would put like stars. So this is a 5-star song, and this is a then 3-star songs, and I think that's kind of like it's not my job then to rate art, but I did then want to invent some forms of traits. So I have the amounts of the subjects there, I believe, and portrait and landscape and so on. But yeah, I mean, I do certainly understand traits in terms of like most PFP collections, because the pieces are not. It's hard to say which ones are the rare ones unless you then point them out, or or it's then hard to find them. But I certainly do think that in case of like this type of art that I've been working on so far, I don't understand how I could say that something is rare.
At the end of the day, I think the most fun traits come from examples like you gave, like the understanding the anecdote or the story behind it that was Rope at midnight, right? It attaches to a real life story and a circumstance. That to me at least resonates at a deeper level, maybe. And then you see, I guess, in a similar type category, the traits that are unlisted but are so apparent, like the goose or the moose, right? Those classic appearances that are not necessarily listed in the categorizations.
Now, and I think those come from the collectors. I mean, it's there. They then come up themselves. So I mean, life in West America. I now then cheat. Yeah. So I had so the trade I did for life in West America is this kind of like form. I call it form. So is there one person, or is there one subject or 2 subjects or 3 subjects or 4 subjects or 5 or more in this piece? So now you can go to forms, and you can find all the pieces that have one subject, or pieces that have 2 subjects, which are then in most cases persons, but then not always. So I thought, well, that's a nice thing. So now you can say that there's like then 35 for. Well, actually, these numbers don't feel right. But yeah, I mean that there's some number of pieces that have two subjects, and I thought, well, that is a nice then trait that you can actually then use.
So now you've handed the collection off. You have 500 artworks, and they make their way out of BrainDrops, and they fall into collectors' hands. What I remember, I don't want to bias the conversation too much, but I remember the collection picking up just this relentless amount of steam. I think a lot of people looked at it. I think it did make people feel. It made a lot of people feel. It made a lot of people consider. I think it stopped a lot of people in their tracks. And there were a lot of different conversations. This is my 2 cents, my memory of the circumstance. There were a lot of conversations going on of, this is interesting. This is intriguing. What is going on here? What is this? Let me process this. How did you feel on your side seeing that reception and seeing it gain some buzz in the space?
Well, of course, I mean, it would be pointless to claim that it then didn't feel good. Of course, it felt fantastic, and it felt then very rewarding, kind of like to see, because that's what all artists probably hope, that the art you spend a lot of time on, that people they resonate and they react to it. So of course that then felt best, and you kind of like, everyone has this probably imposter syndrome, that are you a real, or are you then good at what you're doing? So I do think that seeing that is the ultimate test, kind of like, as I say, the artist doesn't self-define, or can't say I'm the world's best artist, or or the artist, of course, everyone who has a good self-confidence probably thinks that they are like the hot shit, which is good, and I do think people do need to think of it. But of course, then the kind of the reaction is ultimately the thing that kind of like the external feedback actually tells if it's successful or not. So of course that then did feel super great. I do think that kind of like there's many discussions online as to artists and success, that kind of like that success is not tied to the art. It's these kind of collectors that define, that then decide who's a bad art comes to the front, and kind of like all this discussion. I do think that there's probably a component where the art is actually kind of the meaningful, that I mean, me as an example, I am the nobody. I mean, who had heard of me beforehand? So what is this collector then conspiracy of kind of like, let's them start and to pick up this thing of this is kind of like a valuable then collector. I do think that there's a component that it is also about the art itself. So I mean, if the artist that the popularity is probably there's a component where it is actually that it's kind of like the good art. Of course, yeah, I mean, then all the kind of things that then start then to go around it. Right people enjoy it, right people promote it, right people get it first, and they want to see it successful. And I think but that's that's kind of like, I hope it started from the fact that it's like then it started from the art and not the me as a person. So
Now, post BrainDrops, one of getting back to something that I do on a daily basis is cover the space and look at what's happening all over the place. Try to pick up every rock and look under it, literally. And one of the things that I've noticed for quite some time now is Roope Rainisto everywhere, and that could be on Foundation, and that could be on Super Rare, and that could be in your REWORLD collection with Fellowship, and that could be your more recent several piece with Verse and Fellowship, and on and on and on. I've just noticed this incredible diversity of location of your artwork, and I wonder how you think about it. I wonder how you put together your own ecosystem or think through that.
yeah, I mean, that is certainly purposeful. So I do think that kind of like expanding both within this Web3 NFT community, that's of course core. But I'm also interested. So for instance, I have a great partnership with the kind of the fellowship. So I was in the Paris photo exhibition, which was in November. So that was real. Then that was not the online, but of course that's a kind of real the physical thing. And I don't think it's a kind of like that you need to pitch then either or, that that if you go one direction, that it's a kind of like then this service to something else. I do think that they can be highly then supportive. So I think that being visible, active in multiple chains. I mean, I'm also I have artworks on the kind of the Tesos chain, and I have multiple marketplaces and so on. I think that's a kind of way for an artist also then to create, or I can create the different artworks in the different contexts. So I mean, I don't have I don't then explore the different themes, or kind of like have the different approaches. I don't then try out different things, different ways then to is it like one-to-ones, or then all that. So I mean, it's a way to learn, but it's also a way then to gain the visibility up. But it's and then in a selfish way, it's also a way to keep it more than interesting to me. So I'm a person that if I do the same things over and over again, I get easily bored. So that's why it's then also then exciting then to branch out.
That leads to a natural question. What excites you next? Can you share anything, as of today? And I know there's always this endless process of maybe things coming, that some things you maybe can say, some things you maybe can't say. But what excites you next?
Well, I mean, certainly, I mean, I said when then REWORLD came out, I said that, REWORLD will be the last big collection I will do in 2023. And I've then kept then that promise. So of course I had infinite amount of, chances then to put out more, art in 2023. But I kept the promise. Of course, also with the market then kind of relative then downturn, I think it was also a kind of the prudent thing to do. So I mean, I've been certainly working. I've been working on the past 3 to 4 months full time working on art. So I will come out with multiple collections in 2024. But as said, I mean, those kind of official then announcements will come with the parties that I'm working on with their kind of schedules and so on. So that will happen soon. But in addition to that, on a very bigger level, I'm very much, of course, interested in the kind of the video movie world, which is a way then to tell the stories. I think that's kind of like I mean, photos are a way to tell stories. I think photographers, a good photo, people say it's 1,000 words, but I think a good artwork, in a way it's true. So I mean, you can spend as much time exploring the artwork as you would spend reading 1,000 words. I think in that way it's actually a fair thing to do. So of course, they kind of in a technical sense, or in the kind of like what's happening next, is we probably also all see in the advances in terms of AI videos and kind of like AI then a movie making. So of course, right now it's then super primitive. So I mean, it's kind of like if you go back to pictures like then 2 years ago. So I think there's like a 24 months then gap in terms of like the visual quality or the overall quality. But I think that's actually quite a short time. So if you then start to imagine what will be possible with video works in 12 months or in 24 months, that's actually a quite short time. And I think of course videos are super interesting as a way to tell stories, and I think they have much then appeal, even then in the Web3 world, but of course then outside. So I mean, there's a huge potential there. So I think I'm interested in there because I don't think it's kind of like they're all part of the same thing. And I actually think my interest there is a bit like when I said, what's my interest in AI? So I think my interest there is not to replicate the camera exactly with photos. So I think actually my interest with also the video world is the same, that we don't have to build a perfect replica of the kind of the film camera of today, something that would be exactly like that would then create exactly the replicas. It's this kind of like when people say that is this a fake photo, it's kind of funny they say it because they can't tell it looks then flawless, but it's the funnily that the more perfect it looks, then the more you ask is this fake. But in a way, I think also with this AI videos, you can either say where the technology is today. You can either say that it's like an extremely bad camera, or you can say that right now the AI cameras do something that even the world's most expensive cameras can't do. So if you start then you can't then go to the shops and you get a camera that then does the things that these AI cameras then can then even do then today. So it's a kind of question of your personal mindset, I think. Do, are you on the sidelines then waiting for the technology then to mature in a way that it does something that you know, or are you actually interested or then excited with the potential of kind of like once again, you might invent some new ways then to express your feelings, or kind of like new ways then to tell stories, or kind of like, and I think that's like hugely exciting then to me.
It's interesting hearing you talk about AI video, because I know you have a strong relationship with Fellowship. I've been spending a good chunk of time recently on Fellowship AI, Daily.xyz, and just really very much enjoying that, very much enjoying the exploration and seeing some of the different artists and how they do approach film through the AI lens, so to speak.
Yeah, no, dude, it's a question of like time perspective. So I mean, now that we see them today, we're in 2023, we see them today, we kind of like, okay, well, this is kind of like what we're working on right now. But if you really if you can turn in your head the clock forward then to 2028, and you would then see these artworks from 2023, you would see them in a whole different light. You would say, okay, these are the first explorations of kind of like, this is the groundbreaking first minted works. They look completely different from what is now being able to do now that we're in 2028. But I do think kind of like it's sometimes easy to miss the historical moment we are now in time, because because we see them online like every day, and you kind of like, hey, well, I've seen, this is the familiar to me, but we are in an extremely then unusual moment. It's not familiar to 99.9% people in the world, and it's kind of like there's probably pieces in the kind of the daily XYZ that are like extremely historical in 5 years, but it's hard to say today, because you're kind of like, oh, it's this person online and he put some video out there, and kind of like, oh, okay. So it's time will tell, but I do think that a video is probably very interesting for the kind of the collectors, simply because it's also much more rare. So I mean, of course, there is such a thing that something is slightly too rare, but I mean, in a way that finding good AI created videos that are like meaningful is like super hard to do. I think just today or tomorrow, there will be a new collection from the Frank the Manzano, one of my personal favorites. He's gonna have his collection, but he's gonna come out with like then 18 pieces. I mean, 18 is a quite small number if you think about it. So I think it's kind of like really it's if I think it will be very interesting. The people that are now doing it, the kind of the amount is still so small that you can almost like know everyone who's then involved, and I think that's a very rare the moment in time.
And just yesterday, one of my favorites, Nice Aunties, sold their all-time high. So obviously interest is beginning to pick up. I think that's pretty evident.
Yeah, and I do think the Frank and the Nice Artists, I do think they probably have the same as what I mentioned, that they're not trying to replicate existing film kind of understanding, but they're actually trying in their own distinct styles to explore this kind of newness, or explore something that it hasn't yet been done, and I do think that it's the very then I am a big fan of that myself.
Roope, who should be on The Future of Art? Who should I interview?
Oh, well, now that I mentioned Frank, you should probably ask them. Frank, I actually met him there in the kind of the Paris photo, or then Simon Rayon. I'm now then going through the list of people I met there in the Paris, but I'm also a big fan of the Simon. I think he's has been super thoughtful guy, and he's also going to come out with his post-photographic collection, I would say within the next 30 days, if I remember correctly. I think Simon's I'm hoping that it will be a big hit. I'm then pretty sure that he will then come out with something that I will then need to do my best. I don't want to say compete, but he will probably show something that that we haven't seen before.
Amazing. And then in terms of your work, where would you like to direct people? Where can they find you? Where should they go first? Whether that's from an observation perspective, interacting with your work, or even communicating with you on a social platform.
Well, I'm mostly active on then Twitter. I mean X. So you probably find me by searching with my name. So I have this kind of like on the Twitter. Hopefully it won't go bankrupt, but hopefully then Twitter is kind of like my main. I put the most important arts, then quote unquote there. So kind of like and it's a way then to reach me, and it's a way then to discuss. Then if you go onto Instagram, search with my name. Instagram is more like my then I put art on Instagram that I don't put on Twitter, so it's like tests or something I do on a daily basis, or kind of like explorations, things that I find are just like I want to try something, so I think it's a good to try to keep it different, so that you don't just see the same things, so not no matter where you go to. So I think searching with my name, real name on there, you will find my profiles, and I think that's probably the best. I am also on Discords. You probably see me on some of them. Unfortunately, I'm on like 35 Discord, so it's actually hard to. I think Discord is then one of those tools that is a bit too successful for its own good, so it's now impossible to read Discords. But I'm also there. So
incredible. Well, you are forever the 24th episode of The Future of Art. As you know, it's a number that's very special to me. And so I think I'm going to remember this one for quite some time. I just very much appreciate you taking the time at the end of this calendar year. I think the end of a year is always, I don't know how you feel, but always a bit reflective in nature. It's nice to look back. It's nice to look back at a very full year of your art, and then look ahead to a new one.
Yes, thank you. And I do think that this has been a kind of like quite an incredible 12 months to me. So of course, in a way of kind of like 2023, I've became more than well known than I then ever thought to be possible. Plus all the kind of the opportunities that have now opened for me in terms of like what might then 2024 bring. It's like hugely exciting, and I do think this Web3 space, if I may, this final thought, even though it's it has its issues, but I do think it's always important to compare it to the kind of the Web2 world, or the kind of the so-called traditional artwork world. So if this space that wouldn't exist, I would have no chance to become successful artist. I mean, I've not gone to art schools. I live in Helsinki, Finland. I don't know the right. I don't have the right kind of the connections. I don't play by the rules of the traditional artwork. So I mean, the fact that many or most that the artists that are popular in this space, they come from like all over the world with different backgrounds, and kind of like some we don't even know the real names, or but the fact that it's not a kind of showstopper. I think in traditional artwork world, there's so many gatekeepers that they were different. Here, the fact that then somebody then like me has the potential then to become successful, I think. Of course, I mean, you might say it's at the selfish viewpoint, because I'm not the person talking, but I do think that it is kind of like, if I can be successful, I don't really have the best, best kind of like the start in hand then to play with. I do think that it is a sign that then we can all, you can be all, if you have your instinct and you're brave and you actually do spend the time, and you have then good luck, of course, there. I mean, that you can become successful. I do think it is a fantastic feature of this kind of then Web3 space that is then completely different and then distinct from what was possible even a few years ago.
I think it is fascinating, and maybe as a last thought, just to get your feedback on this, I find it fascinating how many people, and this is across every category, creators, collectors, builders, founders, how many people in this current Web3 space have had diverse life experiences that feel like they all connect in some form, in some way, shape, or form here. That you maybe didn't play by, let's say, traditional rules, as you put it. You view the camera differently. You're using these tools in a different way, in a really, really exciting way, and it's all coming together here at the inception of this Web3 space. I think that's quite exciting.
It is exciting, and I do think, well, I mean, is it because the people that play with more? I mean, there's many reasons, and I think the world is a complex place, and it would be unfair to put it in kind of like the black and white terms. But I do think that it's kind of like this diversity is a richness that kind of like if I have this kind of the Scandinavian sensibility, and I do a collection called Life in West America, it's a bit the perverse thing to do, but I do think kind of like this the global thing that actually people are from all over, and they then start to communicate then together and create art, and they're then influenced by each other. I'm influenced by the things that I see. Probably some people are influenced with the things that they see from me, and I think that's like a huge richness, that whereas 100 years ago the artist went to the same kind of the cafe, and then these things then that formed, but it was very kind of like tied to constraints of that you actually had to be there. Now that this be, when we say be there, what is this there? It's this the virtual space where we can all then participate, and we can exchange views with somebody else. We exchange views with the smartest, with some of the smartest people in the world on then we can do it like every day with our phones while we are in our beds. I mean, it's pretty insane. It's easy to take it for them granted, kind of like oh, that's how it works. This sucks, but I don't think it then sucks at all. I think it's an absolutely then fantastic world. So
I think it's a beautiful message. I think it's a beautiful message to leave people with, where I think as life is, you can always look at things that are maybe wrong with the situation, or the things that are crazy with the situation. But there's no doubt, I think you've keyed in on something really special, that in my life is absolutely true. So I hope more people walk away from the conversation considering that the time and place we find ourselves in, and for however long that lasts, and may it be quite some time, to take advantage of that, and to enjoy and have it be fruitful.
Yeah, so my I mean, if I tell you final words of our life is short, and I do think we all feel it in our own ways, and I do think that everything we do, we should keep that in mind, and the biggest risk is not to take a risk, and I think that then applies to many things in life, professionally or then personally, and I do think kind of like that's all for us then to think about what does that mean.
Roope Rainisto, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's a wonderful closing message. I don't want to add anything to that. Thank you. Thank you for spending the time. And I hope that, when 2024 comes to a close or 2025, may we find ourselves in another reflective dialogue.
Yes, I hope so. So let's do so. So I want to thank everyone who had the patience then to listen all the way to the end, and let's then keep on the conversations then also then online.
Thank you for listening and for being part of the future of art. If you liked the episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite platform, and onward to the many conversations that await us. The Future of Art is produced by Artifex. Artifex, Artifex, was created to honor today's top digital fine artists in 3 dimensions. Each artist's one-of-one work of art becomes a collectible 3D sculpture and centerpiece of an immersive world built in Unreal Engine, the creation tool of Epic Games. Search Artifex Viewer on Apple and download our brand new free app to experience the sculptures in augmented reality, and visit artifex.art/unreal to literally step inside the art on your browser.